In today's video, we're continuing on with our NHL season preview series. We're looking our way through the Atlantic Division. Today, we're looking at the Boston Bruins. We'll discuss the Bruins' upcoming season coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're doing the season preview for the Boston Bruins as we work our way through the Atlantic Division teams before we move on to the rest of the NHL. So in case you're new to this series, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look back at last season and recap some of the team and individual statistics, take a look at their cap situation, take a look at how this team has changed between the additions, subtractions, any prospects might get into the lineup, take a look at some players we feel could bounce back or break through this year, and then look at their projected lineup and how we think they're going to do. So let's start first by recapping last year for the Bruins, which was a historic regular season, the best regular season in NHL history. They went on an absolute tear. Seemed like they would never lose. They finished with a record of 65, 12, and 5. That's absolutely crazy. I mean, clearly this team could, probably win 15, 20 games less than last year and still be in playoff contention. That's how far ahead of everybody they were. President's Trophy winning Boston Bruins. Absolutely everything went right. Taking a look at their team stats, you'll see why. Goals for, 301, second in the league. Goals against, 174, first in the league. Power play was not at the top, but still very respectable, 22.2 for 12th best. And the PK was number one as well at 87.3. So as a team, in the first season under Jim Montgomery, this team was clicking at all cylinders. It felt like a last dance type of scenario from the get-go, really not even before the season started, into the offseason. They made the coaching change. Bruce Cassidy was let go. It felt like they needed a new voice in the room, and clearly the players believed that, I think, because we saw the uncertainty around Bergeron, the speculation about a returning Krejci, and all that came to be once they made the coaching change. Certainly, like I said, they went on for kind of one last run as a group. Their top scorers for the year was David Pastrnak, who put out 61 goals, 113 points. Certainly one of the top players in the league. Pasta will certainly have to be, he becomes that much more important now. Marchand was number 2, even though he had a start to the season on IR after a big hip surgery. Finished with 67 points in 73 games, so he's still not too far off from being a point per game player. Bergeron finished with 58 points and another Selke winning season for him to finish out his career. And Pavel Zacha, of course, finished 57 points, which was a big step forward for him after coming to the Bruins from the Devils organization. This team has been a playoff team for a long stretch. It's been a long time since the Boston Bruins have missed the playoffs. Not only have they been a playoff team for a long, long time, but they've been a contending team for a long, long time as well. They've had some deep playoff runs with a lot of the core group of players that's been Boston Bruins for a long time. Unfortunately, now some of those guys are no longer with the team. We'll have to analyze how that's going to impact things. From a cap perspective, right now, they're right up against it, just like a lot of teams over half the league. They only have $429,000 in cap space, and that gives them a 22-player roster. So that's about as flexible as they're going to get to start the year at least, but I do suspect that the roster we have now isn't going to be exact. I think we could see some tweaking before it's all said and done. Let's take a look at how the team has changed, because that's quite important. This team, probably more than any other team, has gone through more significant changes than any other team in the league. Looking at the subtractions first, they lost captain and one of the greatest all-time two-way players, Patrice Bergeron. I have no doubt that Selke Trophy is one day going to be named a Bergeron Trophy. At least it should, in my opinion. But that's a huge loss, not only on the ice, but off the ice, the leadership, the two-way play. It's just, that's a huge blow. And of course, David Krejci, who was the number 2 center behind Bergeron for all those years, -1 when he played in Europe 2 seasons ago, also calls it a career. So, I mean, their top 2 centermen who were there for an eternity are no longer there. That's an absolutely huge blow. For a team to lose both their top 6 centers and not be able to replace them with legit experienced top 6 centers, that's a big blow. They also picked up a lot of players at the deadline as they went all in trying to go for it with this team, and I understand why. They had every reason to think that this was a cup contending team after the regular season they had. They brought in Tyler Bertuzzi, Dmitry Orlov, and Garnet Hathaway, and none of them were able to be retained, largely due to the cap situation. I think there was interest in all of them to some degree, but they just couldn't do it. unfortunately, and all three are gone. So those are more big blows. Now, those guys were only there for the end of the season and playoff run, which unfortunately wasn't very long. They also had to move Taylor Hall. They did that to cut some cost. Nick Foligno also out. Connor Clifton, Mike Riley, and Thomas Nosek, amongst the other players not returning. Now, some of these guys were UFAs, and we knew they weren't coming back, and it wouldn't have mattered about cap situation or anything. Like, we knew Mike Riley wasn't coming back. We knew Nick Foligno wasn't coming back. Those are not huge, shocking situations at all. The Taylor Hall trade was a little bit more of a, I wouldn't call it a shocker, because it wasn't. I kind of seen that coming, but it's a bigger impact. I mean, he might not be the Hart Trophy player he was based on that 1 year he had in New Jersey, but he was a third-line player that they couldn't afford anymore. I mean, they had a deep lineup, and he didn't always play top six. And, it's just unfortunate that his contract was looking at it saying, okay, this is one that unfortunately we feel like we can live without here, or we can find ways to replace what he does cheaper. That was the premise behind the Taylor Hall trade. Now, looking at the additions, these names are not going to blow you away. It's a big change here. Joining the club this year are Morgan Geekie, who comes from Seattle. Geekie's good size, going to be a bottom six centerman for them. Largely unproven, in my opinion. You get JVR, Milan Lucic come over. Of course, those guys. Lucic has a long history in Boston. Lucic, we know what he is at this point in his career. He's a fourth liner. He's out there as an energy guy to try to throw some hits, not afraid to drop the gloves. He's a prototypical Bruin, has been his whole career, and obviously where he started. So it's like a homecoming for him. JVR, not a swift skater. He's probably going to play. He might play top six, maybe plays third line. Hard to say exactly where he gets placed in the lineup. He could play first line. He can play them in a variety of spots. He's not the greatest skater. He's going to plunk himself near the net. All of his goals tend to come in close or in a power play, tips, all that kind of stuff. They also brought in Jesper Boqvist, Kevin Shattenkirk, Patrick Brown, Ian Mitchell. I mean, those are really, no offense to any of them, not names to get excited about. Big, huge change. When you're losing Bergeron, Krejci, Bertuzzi, Hall, and then your replacements are Geekie, JVR, Lucic, Boqvist, it's like, ooh, wow, this is huge, right? Now, they also have players on PTOs that are not signed right now that could become part of the roster, which include Danton Heinen and Alex Chason. I would think there's a possibility of one or both getting signed. I think the possibility of Heinen getting signed is greater. Heinen has history there. Heinen also has history with head coach Jim Montgomery. Had some of his best time and development under him through the University of Denver before Montgomery coached in the NHL. So would not be shocked to see Heinen catch on with the Bruins here. I think there's a lot that he can provide in a bottom six role. I really do. Prospect-wise, you're going to see guys like Johnny Beecher, Fabian Lysell have opportunities, but I'd also keep an eye on Georgi Merkulov. I mean, Merkulov had a phenomenal year in the American Hockey League, and honestly, I think he should be given a chance. Hard to say exactly how things line up, though, roster-wise, but at the very least, I'm not sure any of these guys start the year with the Bruins, but I think they're all going to be call-up options and all see some games with the Bruins, and they're all prospects that the Bruins need to keep an eye on, because to be honest, outside of these guys, there's not a lot in the cupboard. So they need to hope that some of these guys can work out for them longer term. Looking at some players you could qualify as bounce back or breakthrough. Bounce back players, I'd say, I'm picking JVR because his time in Philly, like last year, was a down season. He only had 12 goals, but for the most part, he's been 15 to 20, only on a 1 year deal. So he's kind of trying to prove that he can still play. He's on one of those veteran prove it contracts type of thing. So I can see JVR maybe getting a little bit more ice time, hopefully get maybe a better role, and maybe a chance because of the weaker top six to get more of a top line minute opportunity, more power play time, that maybe he can increase his production. And for breakthrough, I think the Bruins need to hope that's Connor Geekie. I think they're kind of betting a lot here. Certainly, Geekie's likely going to play either third or fourth line center for them. And like I said before, like he started in Carolina. Ron Francis brought him to Seattle. Of course, he knew him from Carolina days. He was the GM there and drafted him. But he's still largely unproven. And with Ron Francis giving him a second chance, bringing him from Carolina to Seattle and then letting him go the way they did, not a lot of confidence there. So I don't know. We'll see where things go with Geekie. I'm not real sure what you're going to get from him in Boston as a bottom 6. Looking at their projected lineup, right now, this is courtesy of dailyfaceoff.com. These lines are not exact. This is kind of their best guesstimate, are largely based on depth charts as well. So to some degree, some of it's based on where they anticipate players to play. But right now, they're projecting the first line to be Zacha with Pasternak and JVR, and then the second line to be Coyle with Marchand and DeBrusk. Now, of course, we've seen Marchand play a lot with Pasternak and Bergeron over the years. They could flip that, put Marshy back with Pasta and Zacha, or, I'm not sure how they're going to do this, but Zacha and Coyle are going to be your top 2 centers. We know that. We know Pasta, DeBrusk are going to be your top 2 on the right side, and Marchand's going to be your top left winger, with JVR being kind of right there as well because of the lack of depth, unfortunately. Your third line right now projects to be probably Frederick with Laukow and Boqvist. I can see Heinen, though, getting in there and getting on that line. I think Denton Heine gets signed. It's going to be one of those players that he takes out, either Boqvist or Laukow. And then your fourth line right now projects to be Geeky, Lucic, and Greer. On your back end, of course, you got McAvoy and Grzelcyk, Lindholm, Carlo. Of course, Shattenkirk and Derek Forbort round out your top 6 defense spots. Your goaltending tandem is still the same as last year, Ullmark and Swayman. Of course, Ullmark had Vezina season. Can he duplicate that? The team in front of him is not going to be as strong. And to be honest, it's real easy to see Ullmark having a step back, because that type of season is going to be incredibly difficult to duplicate. And just for that reason alone, it'd be really, really hard for anybody to do that 2 years in a row. They also had the ultimate top defensive team in front of them, which, like I said, I think they're still going to be good defensively. I don't know if they'll be as good as last year, though, missing, especially with Bergeron out of the lineup. So I suspect that there's going to be some steps back there. I mean, everybody suspects Boston's not going to put together a season like they did last year, but how much of a step back do we see? I see some predictions already coming out and saying they're going to be out of the playoffs. I see some saying they're going to step back, but not too much, still be maybe third in the division. I see other people saying, you know what, I can see some other teams, maybe like Ottawa or Buffalo, Florida, maybe getting ahead of them, and maybe they slip to a wild card. There's a variety of opinions out there. This is a team that's going to be very difficult to predict. But are they taking a step back? I'm going to go on a limb here and say absolutely. It's just how significant is the unknown here. That's the part, that we don't really understand. Of course, like I mentioned as well, some other questions to look for is either of these guys on PTOs get signed and end up on the roster. I think there's a chance at least one of them does. Some guys can go on waivers if need be to make room. Like I said, Ullmark and Swayman. Swayman's going to be a little easier to duplicate with the smaller sample size that he played. The center depth is a huge concern when you go from Bergeron, Krejci, Coyle, 1, 2, 3 to Zacha, Coyle, Frederick, Geeky, I don't know. That's a huge, huge change. I also wonder if they're going to name a new captain, and I think there's a good chance they will. This team has not gone without in a long time, and I can understand teams waiting if they don't have a clear-cut answer to who the captain is. I think Brad Marchand is an ideal candidate here. Charlie McAvoy is somebody I wouldn't rule out. It's going to depend on what direction they want to go. If they did the handoff from Chara to Bergeron, like a seamless move that was easy to pick, right? And they can do the same thing, Bergeron to Marchand, if they want. I mean, maybe Marchand carries that for a few years until he's done, and then they go to a guy like McAvoy later. Or do they take the jump right now to McAvoy and see him being the captain for a longer stretch? It's got to be Marchand or McAvoy. I don't think there's anybody else on the roster that's really going to be under consideration. And like I said, the more likely solution here is go Marchand, and eventually he gives it over to McAvoy. But we'll see. Lots and lots of change for Boston this year. Significant changes for sure. Personally, like I said, they're going to take a step back. It's hard to bet against this team, though. They still have great goaltending. They still have a good D-core that's largely, for the most part, the same, except for one on your top 6 from last year. So, honestly, it's tough to bet against these guys. The big thing for me is I don't think they're going to score as much. I mean, Pasternak is always going to be dangerous. In Marchand, of course, DeBrusk had a good season, but there's not as much depth. The goal scoring is likely going to come down. So if the goals against can't hold, or if there's too much of a jump in that's going to be the difference to them winning and losing games. In all honesty, I think we're going to see a situation where they're going to have to probably win some tighter games, like lower scoring. But we'll see. That's my anticipation for the Bruins. I think they're definitely at the very least going to be in the playoff conversation. I can't say with certainty right now that this is a playoff team, but I've also learned over the years that you don't bet against the Bruins. This team has always found a way, and they continue to prove people wrong. When you thought they were taking a step back, look what happened last year. So, yes, they're missing some big key pieces, but can they, like I said, they could still win 20 games less and be in the conversation, which is, it's hard to imagine it being more of a drastic change than that. But let me know what you think of the Bruins in the upcoming season down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.